threat. It's not there. Trust me. If the defense had it, they'd play it for you. Now, they want you to believe that that threat is made, and they also want you to believe that it was something that the defendant took into account when he decided to kill Joseph Rosenbaum. One of the questions that occurs to me is, how would the defendant even know who that guy is? Because earlier in the night, Joseph Rosenbaum is wearing a red shirt and a blue bandana. But by the time he's killed, he's got no shirt on. He's got no blue bandana. This is someone the defendant has never even met before. He's one of hundreds of people in the crowd. And yet, we're expected to believe that in a split second, the defendant remembers this guy? I don't believe so. So then, that video that I just showed you leaves off at about 11:35 p.m. The police have moved the protesters south of 60th Street. They've tear gassed the crowd, and there's no protesters left. 59th Street is no longer in any danger. It wasn't much danger to begin with. There wasn't anything left there to protect. But by this point, there's no more danger. As law enforcement comes through, you've heard this video where they tell the defendant and his group, "We appreciate you," and hand him out bottles of water. As long as you stay on that private property, yeah. No one is saying you don't have the right to stay on private property and protect private property. What people are saying, what the crowd is saying, is stay there. Don't go out looking for trouble. The defendant hears this message from the police and takes it the wrong way. He thinks, oh, well, now I'm junior policeman. I can go run around stopping crime. But I asked him and I asked some other witnesses, if the police are there on the scene and the protesters are gone, go home. Why are you still here? Shouldn't have been here in the first place. But why are you still sticking around? And interestingly enough, one of the questions I've always had in the back of my mind is, what's the end game here? When is this crew going to be done and decide that it's time to leave? Well, right after the defendant kills Joseph Rosenbaum, kills Anthony Huber, and comes back, they all flee like rats off a sinking ship. But it's boring at 59th Street. There's no protesters. There's no action. So the defendant decides about 11:35 p.m. to cross the police line and go looking for trouble. He knows at this point he's entering a hostile crowd. He's seen this crowd. He knows what they're like. That's why he has to yell friendly to them, because he knows they're not going to see him and think he's friendly. And he knows he's got to have Ryan Balch with him, some sort of buddy to protect him. And he's immediately confronted by that man with the yellow pants who says, "You just pointed your gun at me." And the defendant says, "Yeah, I did." He admits that. Now, what's interesting to me is they want you to believe this never happened. They want you to believe this guy in the yellow pants made it up or is lying. But he's just standing there by the side of the road, minding his own business, when the defendant happens to walk up to him. Do you think he just sat there and thought, oh, I'm going to make up a lie about this guy on the spur of the moment? Or did it really happen? And is it consistent with everything else you've seen about the defendant? Does he sound like the sort of guy who would point a gun at someone for standing on a car? Does he strike you as the kind of guy that would threaten deadly force to protect property? Because that's what happened. The man in the yellow pants says it happened. The defendant agrees. And then he comes into the trial and says, oh, I was being sarcastic, like he's a little 17-year-old and he wants to get out of it. Shortly after that, the defendant loses track of his protector, Ryan Balch. So now he's in a position where he knows that he's surrounded by people that consider him a threat. He knows that he's not supposed to go anywhere without Ryan Balch. He knows he's supposed to go back to 59th Street. And he does. He tries. He walks up to the police line. He says, I work there. That's my business. Which isn't true, but whatever. And they won't let him through. Now, Ryan Balch makes it on through shortly thereafter. But the defendant gives up. He could go one block in either direction and make it back easily if he wants to. But he stops and decides, you know what, I'm going to stay here and maybe see what's going to happen. So then he talks to these people with fire extinguishers. And he's going to go down to 63rd Street And he asks one of them to come along. And they say no. Now at this point, doesn't have Ryan Balch. He knows he's supposed to go back. He knows he's supposed to have a buddy. And yet he decides to go it alone. He decides to run down to 63rd Street or walk down to 63rd Street. Doesn't even know if that other group is still there. Doesn't even know if he's really needed. But he can't wait to take this opportunity to go down and confront people. Because he thinks he's some sort of cop, some sort of law enforcement agent, some sort of junior cadet who's out there with the responsibility to fight crime. Nobody asked him to do that. Nobody gave him the right. Nobody deputized him. Ryan Balch says, the police told me the crowds, we're going to push him down by you, you're going to deal with him. The Bearcats hand out water and tell him he's appreciated. As he's crossing the police line, they warn him about people throwing rocks. What is the message the defendant takes from all of this? The wrong message. Oh, well, now I've got the power. I've got the gun. I'm going to go confront these bad guys. I'm going to stick my nose in things. So what does he do when he gets down to 63rd Street? The first thing he does, we showed it to you at the very beginning, that drone video, grabs that gun and points it at someone to protect property. Points it at the Zeminskis. Because why? Because they're, what, about to mess with some sort of fire? They're not threatening anyone's lives. He doesn't need to protect anyone. He doesn't need to protect himself. He's pointing a gun because he thinks he needs to protect property. He says he wants to put out a fire, but the first thing he does is drop the fire extinguisher on the ground. His AR-15 isn't going to put out a fire. So why is he really there? And we all agree you can't use or threaten deadly force to protect someone else's property. You are here to decide whether or not his actions are legally justified, not to buy pathetic excuses that might be given to you. As a teacher, when a student says to you, the dog ate my homework, that's an excuse. It doesn't get you out of the homework assignment. If you panic in a situation that is not reasonable, that is an excuse. It is not a legal justification. If you're 17, if you don't have training or experience, if you put yourself in a situation where you're in over your head, if you're scared, those are excuses. Those are not legal justifications to kill. They do not erase your personal responsibility for your own actions. The court has read to you the instructions in this case. They lay out the law that you should apply. That reading took a long time, and I understand there was a lot to digest. And one of the things that you will have the opportunity to do when you go back and deliberate is read through those instructions yourselves. Because I get that listening to them doesn't always make it clear. But I encourage you to focus on some things when you consider the defendant's behavior in this case. You are told that criminally reckless conduct is conduct that threatens other people's lives and poses an unreasonable and substantial risk to other people. There is no dispute the defendant's activities here threatened other people's lives. He took 2 lives. You know, this is not like a normal murder case. A lot of murder cases we're in here trying to convince a jury that the defendant killed somebody. That's not in dispute here. That's the easy part. The question is, does he get a pass? Do we think that's okay? Do we think what he did was right? That's the question you have to answer. And when you consider whether his conduct was criminally reckless, consider, did it pose an unreasonable and substantial threat to the safety of others? Count 4 charges him with first-degree intentional homicide of Anthony Huber. There is no doubt that the defendant intended to kill Anthony Huber or committed conduct that he knew was practically certain to kill Anthony Huber. That gun was pointed at Anthony Huber's lower left rib cage, and the defendant deliberately pulled the trigger. That was no accident. And when you do that with an AR-15 against someone's body, it is practically certain to kill. We all know this case comes down to self-defense. But there's a high bar for using deadly force in a self-defense situation. The law says that the defendant may intentionally use force, which is intended or likely to cause death or great bodily harm, only if the defendant reasonably believed that the force was necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself. So did Joseph Rosenbaum pose an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to the defendant? No way.
All right, I gotta grab some coffee. Just give me a second.
Pose an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to the defendant? Absolutely not. Did Jump Kick Man or Gage Grosskreutz? No. None of these people posed an imminent threat to the defendant's life or to cause great bodily harm. The standard, when you make this decision, is what a person of ordinary intelligence and prudence would have believed in the defendant's position under the circumstances that existed at the time of the alleged offense. The reasonableness of the defendant's beliefs must be determined from the standpoint of the defendant at the time of the defendant's acts and not from the viewpoint of the jury now. So put yourself in the defendant's position. Would you have done the same thing? Would a reasonable person have done the same thing? Would you have engaged in the reckless conduct that led to this course of events? Would you have gone out after curfew with an AR-15 looking for trouble? Would you have aimed at other people? And not only is the defendant expected to run, he's expected to yell, push, shove that rag doll around, run back for help, call 911, call for help, do all sorts of other things besides just turn and fire 4 shots as Joseph Rosenbaum falls helpless to the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt in this case that the defendant committed these crimes. He committed a first-degree reckless homicide against Joseph Rosenbaum. He put Richie McGinnis's life in jeopardy. He put Jump Kick Man's life in jeopardy. He intended to kill Anthony Huber, and he attempted to kill Gage Grosskreutz. All of those elements are true. The question is whether or not you believe that his actions were legally justified. And I submit to you that no reasonable person would have done what the defendant did. And that makes your decision easy. He is guilty of all counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's take a break and about 2:25 hopefully. And please don't talk about the case. Read, watch, or listen to any count of the trial.
All right. That took forever. That guy was going on and on forever. Oh my goodness, are we going through it again? YouTube is pissed today. Alright, we're going to cut it off and we'll be back at 25 after when they come back from break. I don't really know what to do about all this censorship stuff. This stuff is stupid. They're really pissy